Hi everyone, I'm Raga D'silva, your host for Older Queer Voices, a podcast where we explore the stories, experiences, and contributions of older LGBTQ plus people. Today's conversation is not just about history, it is about memory, protest, and what it means to be alive in a time when so many were not allowed to live. There are people who witness the HIV and AIDS crisis from the outside, and there are people who lived through it with their bodies on the line, where fear traveled faster than facts and silence was more deadly than the virus itself. When the world turned its back on the community, already pushed to the margins, a few stood firm and refused to disappear quietly. Jonathan Blake is one of those people. Diagnosed with HIV in 1982 at a time when the world itself felt like a death sentence, Jonathan became one of the first people in the UK to survive an AIDS diagnosis. His life since then has not just been about survival, but about defiance, visibility, and a deep commitment to ensuring that our stories are not erased or sanitized. From his work with lesbian and gay supports the minors to his continued involvement with the UK AIDS Memorial Quilt, including contributing a panel in memory of his late partner, Nigel Young, Jonathan's activism has always sat in the intersection of grief, resistance, and remembrance. We will take you through this incredible journey of Jonathan Blake in his own words. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello. God.
So good to have you. You
Oh,
know,
thank you.
I I I keep telling myself I'm so glad our paths crossed because that one conversation with you ignited something in me, and I said, we need to get you. We need to get your story, Jonathan. So thank you.
No, well, listen, thank you, because I think it's really important to talk. Um, and so I'm really pleased to do this, Raga.
Thank you. So Jonathan, for our listeners who may not be familiar with your story and your work,
Mhm.
can you just share a little bit about yourself and the journey that has brought you here today?
Wow. I mean, in a way, where do I start? Um, I was um, trained as an actor, and round about 1981, the business seemed to give me up. Um, And I had a very dear friend who was getting married in San Francisco. And I was invited to go there and be one of the ushers. And I also had a very dear friend, George Hodson, um, who I had lived with in London. He had decided that there was something very exciting happening in San Francisco. So he sold his flat, moved to San Francisco, and my friend Deborah was getting married in Berkeley because she was came from Berkeley. That's where her parents lived. Nice Jewish family. And I was invited to be an usher. So I went and I stayed with my friend George in San Francisco. And I've always loved bathhouses. So, of course, I explored the bathhouses. And that was that. And I thought nothing of it. And it was great. We had the wedding was fantastic. I had a fabulous 2 weeks in San Francisco, just, exploring the city, seeing my friend George. And then suddenly I'm back in London. Um, Sometimes when I'm out of work as an actor, I get a job working in Joe Allen, which was like a famous New York restaurant, but it opened a branch in London. So I'm waiting tables there. Um, and suddenly I realized that every single lymph node in my body is beginning to erupt. And I get to the point that I'm walking like a gorilla. I have to stop working. Because I have been at Joe Allen's for a period of time, I actually qualify for sick pay. Um, so that helps me. And I make an appointment to go and see my GP. I'm living in the East End of London. And I make an appointment to see my GP. And as I walk in, she stands up and she says, "Shake my hand." And as I shake her hand, she feels the lymph node in the crook of my arm. And it is painful. And I go, ow, what did you do that for? And she says, that's the sailor's handshake. Whenever the sailors would go into port, they would shake the women or the men's hands they were going with. And if that lymph node was up, it was a sign of syphilis. And they wouldn't go with them. So she said, have you had a syphilis test recently? I said, I've had syphilis, but no, I haven't. So she said, I suggest that you go to your sexual health clinic. I think that, yes, she said that. I would call it the clap clinic. Anyway, and I used to go to James Pringle House, which was the sexual health clinic of the Middlesex Hospital. And I took myself there and they were all over me. And they decided they needed to do a biopsy. So they put me in a side ward and I was held there basically for 2 days. When they had taken the biopsy, they were waiting for, to grow the culture. And I was, as I say, there for 2 days. And eventually they came back and they said, you have a virus. There is no cure. You have between 3 and 9 months to live. Oh, and there will be palliative care. Well, I'm 33. Do I really want to hear about palliative care? And basically that was that. And I could go home. And I don't even remember going back to my apartment in the East End. I was obviously like on autopilot. I was like a homing picture. And I remember arriving there and closing my front door and utterly collapsing.
Wow. Sorry, Jonathan, I'm going to interrupt here. Just want to, the picture you've painted so far I can understand. But at that time, there was nothing, right? There was no conversations around this virus.
There was no conversation.
So did you even understand what they mean? Yeah, it didn't have a language or a name. So did you even understand when they said you have a virus? So what virus are we talking about?
They had it. It was like they told me that this virus had no name. So it was just a virus. And no one knew anything about it at that point. And then, for instance, you see, when I was in San Francisco in January and February. And it wasn't until the July of that year that they started talking about Kaposi's sarcoma. So I missed all that. So it was just, I got this diagnosis of a virus for which there was no cure. So it was like a death sentence. I mean, and that's, as I say, that's why I got into my flat and I just collapsed. And I didn't get in touch with anybody. I kind of cut myself off because I felt like a modern day leper. I mean, what are you going to do? How are you going to meet people? Oh, hello, my name's Jonathan. I have this killer virus coursing through my veins. I mean, it was awful.
I can only imagine, Jonathan. I can only imagine. So were you in a relationship at that point? Did you have anyone to share this with?
And I had no, and I didn't talk to anyone. But then I realized that I needed to be around people. So I would take myself off to the gay bars and find the darkest place to stand and kind of just giving out these vibes, don't come near me. Wow. But I say, I just needed to be around people. But I would always pick up a copy of Capital Gay. And Capital Gay was just this wonderful sort of gay newspaper, which began to talk about what was happening. And it was really difficult reading. And it did reach the point that I suddenly realized, and this is kind of like towards the December of 1982, that what lay in front of me was so horrendous that my only option, I felt, was to take my own life.
Oh my God.
And somewhere I had read, and I don't know where I got it from, that if you run a hot bath and slit your wrists in hot water, it is less painful bleeding out. And I had pills, I'd got some sort of pills, I got some alcohol, and that was what I was going to do. Until, of course, the voice of my mother Golda came in my head saying, Jonathan, you clear up your own mess. You don't leave it for others to clear up after you. And I just thought, I'm going to leave one hell of a mess. I can't do this. So that option was out the window. And then it was just a question of, well, how on earth do you kind of rejoin society? Because I just pulled myself away. And I'm still going to the bars, and I'm still not really getting in touch with people. But I pick up a copy of Capital Gay one day, and there is this tiny little advertisement. Gays for a nuclear-free future are running a coach, leaving at 11 a.m. on the 1st of April 1983, which I thought, great, All Fool's Day, leaving at 11 a.m. from outside Gays the Word, everybody welcome. And I just thought, okay, it says everybody welcome. This is going to be my re-entry into society. And I remember leaving my apartment in the East End, my Peabody Trust apartment, and going to Shadwell Tube and coming out at Russell Square, and I crossed the zebra crossing and I could see the coach outside Gays the Word. And I suddenly thought, what the fuck am I doing here? And I turned on my heels to flee. And literally, as I turned on my heels to flee, this voice went, hello, my name's Nigel. Who are you?
How cute.
I swung round and I see this guy wearing green Wellington boots, crimson and ochre pantaloons, this crimson Fair Isle singlet, and this mop of black curly hair. And I looked at him and I just went, oh, Jonathan. And we walked off to the coach together. And we had the most amazing time. And I told him about my diagnosis, but it made no difference whatsoever. And he was introducing me to all his friends on the coach. And there were one or two people that I knew of. And it was amazing. And we went and we joined this stand together, which CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, had organized. And they wanted to form a human chain around Greenham Common, which was the American air base, and of course the famous women's camp, and Burfield and Aldermaston, which were the two British nuclear establishments. And it was a kind of a 20-kilometre circumference between each of these points. And we joined this human chain. We just held hands. And it was amazing. And it was so powerful. And we then come back to London. I mean, a number of people got lost and missed the coach back and what have you. But anyway, Nigel and I got back, and Nigel was going off to a party. Noel Gregg of Gay Sweatshop had kind of said, oh, everybody back to his squat for a party. But I was exhausted, my first day out. Sure. Amazing. So I said to Nigel, why didn't he come and have tea with me the next day? And the next day he arrives, and he arrives with a bunch of anemones and 2 jam donuts. He's bought tea. And he says to me, you're living isolated in the East End. I know someone who would like to sublet your flat. I know of a squat in Brixton. Why don't we move in together? And I just thought, I like this person. I've got about 3 months to live. Why not? And so I did. And we moved into this squat. He knew the matriarch of the squat. It was on St. James's Crescent in Brixton, so opposite Villa Road. And we were there for like 3 months, and then there was an issue and we had to leave. But Nigel had lived around that area, during the riots, during the uprising. And he actually had missed it because he and a friend of his, Peter Bradley, had gone to see Janet Baker sing Julius Caesar in the opera of that name, Handel's opera. So they had gone off to see it. The riots had ensued. They got back to Brixton and the police would not let them up Relton Road. Eventually they did. So he knew of what there had been back in the early 70s or mid 70s, was that there were a group of lesbian and gays who squatted a number of houses on Relton Road. And they had created this lesbian and gay squat. And they went to Lambeth Council and they said, we would like to buy our property. And Lambeth Council drew themselves up to their full height and said, we do not sell to squatters, but added, we only sell to registered housing associations and housing cooperatives, go away. And they went away and they had a meeting amongst, because there were a whole number of squats around Relton Road. And they had a meeting and they decided to go to this organization called the Housing Corporation to register Brixton Housing Co-op. And they registered it. And they then went back to the council and said, we would like to buy our properties. And the council started off, we told you we are not squatters. We are a registered housing cooperative, Brixton Housing Cooperative. So these 8 houses, 5 on Relton Road and 3 on Mail Road, were sold for £3,000 each.
Wow. Jonathan, I'm going to interrupt you. I mean, this is like, wow. It's like something I don't think many of us or most of us know this story unless we've lived through that time. I'm learning so much, and that's why I'm like listening to you intently. But I'm going to come back to your illness at this point. You're 33. Right. You've been told 3 months to live or 3 to 9 months to live. You've met this new person in your life. But I'm just trying to understand how it was in the scene at that time. How was the situation? I mean, you're the first one who got diagnosed. Did you find others who were going through something similar? Was they said no cure? So what were your medications at all? So how were you managing?
There was no medication. There was nothing.
Okay.
Every so often, the Middlesex Hospital would ring me up every so often and get me to come down and have an MRI scan because they wanted to find out whether the virus had got through the blood-brain barrier. And I mean, all this was it was new to them and new to me.
Sure.
And I think that my way of dealing with it was in a way not dealing with it. So like meeting Nigel, suddenly, having met this person, one just got involved with him. And because he had been incredibly politically active, he'd been part of the Gay Left Collective. So, politics was just in his core. So, we were just doing things together. And then when we sort of come and join Brixton Housing Co-op, so we come up to 146 Mail Road, where the rooms are, and the rooms are available. So we're said that we can come and move in. So I instantly join the housing co-op, and I joined the development subcommittee, and I get really involved with that because that's my way of dealing with this awful diagnosis, and I don't want to be thinking about it. So if I keep myself occupied, busy doing stuff, then I that was how I went about it.
Sure.
And you
How,
see,
sorry, at that point, sorry, how was your acting career at that point?
oh,
What were
my
you
acting
doing?
career had disappeared. I mean,
Okay.
that I I made this film, which was God, I'm trying to think what the title of it was. It kind of goes out the window. Oh, well, we'll get back to that. But it was basically a film about John Paul II, the Polish Pope. And I'd been cast as a Jew who was rescued from the ghetto. And basically, I was contracted for 2 weeks. And then the 2 weeks eventually ended up into 3 months because they kept writing up this character, Joseph, who, having been rescued sort of from the ghetto in Krakow, joins the Communist Party, becomes quite sort of important and powerful within the Communist Party, but at the same time is a lecturer at the universities. And in 1968, the Communist Party threw all the Jews out of the education system in Poland. I mean, I didn't know anything about that, but this was the story of my character. I mean, it kind of blew my mind. And whilst I was there, I took myself off to Auschwitz by myself because I wanted I needed to see it. I felt as a Jewish man, even though I'm not practicing, I needed to go there. And so I took myself there. And then later they were filming at Auschwitz. And I went with them for the filming. I mean, I wasn't involved in the filming. And it was really extraordinary because all the people who were sort of the inmates were really it was a really depressing. And yet all the people who were playing Germans were having a kind of field day. And it was so weird. It was so weird. And I thought that this job, that was it. This was going to be my break. Nothing happened. Okay. And then I did a film for STV. And again, it won awards, but nothing happened. So, my acting career was just down the drain. So, yeah.
How was your emotional state at that time? With all this happening. I mean, I'm just trying to understand and imagine something that's you're going through it alone in a manner. And of course, you have Nigel now.
I was going through it alone, but as a kid, my parents lived in Birmingham, middle class, Jewish family, what have you. We were sent to boarding school. But I loved it because I was around boys. I already knew that I was other, from a very early age. Even when, this is what it's so extraordinary. When I was at like prep school, there was a lovely headmistress, Mary McGeoch. And if I could never be found, she said, go and find where Bert is because Jonathan will be there. And sure enough, and Bert was the caretaker. And I don't know, but I just loved being around him. I just, his smell, it just excited me. Nothing happened. There was nothing untoward. And she was amazing in terms that she never pretended or thought that anything was thing. It was just, if you can't find Jonathan, he'll be there. And I was. So, as I say, I knew I was other, but I was also aware that I was other that you couldn't talk about it. And I don't know how one gets that, you know, but you just, somehow we do, don't we?
Yeah,
That
it's interesting that you
yeah,
though that you voice it in this manner, because I'm sure even today some of us feel that way.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah. So then, continuing, one then went to public school, and that was the same. But I think that probably because of that sort of isolation that one felt, that that's kind of gave me a resilience that I had no idea that I had. So that when I couldn't kill myself, I still kept going back to being with people, but I wasn't sharing my story. So that really the first person that I shared it with was Nigel,
Sure.
and
And
that didn't seem to be a problem for him. And then I began to get back in contact with people.
sure.
And what was extraordinary was that I have a younger brother, and my younger brother and I got on amazingly. My relationship with my elder brother was just appalling, basically because, he was the firstborn. After 3 years, I come along and I take all the love that was his. And, it obviously built up a resentment in him. Whereas I and my younger brother kind of got on, even though my younger brother was academically bright. So he's 15 months younger than me, but he's always put up into the A stream of the same year that I'm in, and I'm in the C stream because I'm not interested in academics and stuff. I like the land of make believe. And there was we had this wonderful art teacher, Eileen Fisher, and she was married to the Alan Fisher, who was taught Latin and Greek. And my younger brother was kind of, was the apple of Alan's eye. And Eileen said to my mother, she took my mother aside one day and she said, Andrew might be academically bright, but Jonathan is creative and you need to feed his creativity. My mother loved theatre. She'd been to the theatre when she lived in London. And then basically she had studied domestic science, and she had got a job as a domestic science teacher in Birmingham. And my father's sister, Nora, was a great friend of my mother's sister, Anne, who was much older than Golda. But so Nora had said to Anne, tell Golda when she goes to Birmingham to go to the Sheepcote Street Cinema and look for the Goodmans, which was her family, and they'll look after you. So she did, and introduced herself, and they had invited her to go and have Sunday lunch with them. My father was working up in Manchester. He got some clothes that needed cleaning. So, he just happened to arrive with his laundry to be done, and met my mother, and they started a relationship. I mean, it was just bizarre. So that's how I came to be,
Sure. So Jonathan, again from there, I'm just going back and forth, and I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
yeah, yeah.
think at what time. I mean, I'm going back to that AIDS time because it is really important for us to understand from
Mm-hmm.
a historic point of view as well
Yeah,
how
yeah,
it impacted people, and
yeah.
not just that. When did shame come into the picture? To this whole thing, was it the media? Was it created by the media at that time?
Basically, the media did, and the media did it in exactly the same way as they had in America. And my sense of it is that because gay liberation had made extraordinary strides, you know, in the States, even here, that I think that worried the kind of media. So suddenly they had this weapon, and they basically weaponized HIV. And it's really interesting because in 1987, the government did a Don't Die of Ignorance campaign. And I'm sure that, well, I don't know whether people remember it. And in a way they should, but they should go and seek it out. It was the Tombstone advert. And John Hurt was the voiceover. There is a virus. But what was interesting, there is a virus. It can affect anybody. I mean, that was the line. Exactly the same with COVID. But the press weaponized it. And it was the press starting to talk about this gay disease, this grid. So it all was about homosexuals and homosexuals bringing it on themselves. And that was where the kind of the shame started, and also the misinformation, because suddenly they have weaponized it. They're calling this gay disease, but there are women who are contracting HIV. Well, you know, I mean, how do they fit in that they've got a homosexual virus? I mean, it's crazy, but the damage that did. I mean, I loathe that advertisement because it dealt in fear. But at the same time, I understand that it was necessary. But of course, at that time, we didn't have social media. You know, there weren't mobile phones. There was basically landlines if you were lucky, or you would have a telephone box in digs or in bedsits. So, you know, what have you. And there were magazines and there were newspaper. And that was it. I mean, we lived and we had, you know, we made amazing things and did amazing things. And I don't think that people can quite understand how on earth one can have a life. You know, if you haven't got a mobile phone, you haven't got a computer, you haven't got, but we did.
Yeah, I think I have met so many younger people now who can't understand a life without social media. And you
Yeah.
know, in a way, when you're speaking, I'm thinking, thank God there was no social media. You know,
Oh,
the misinformation and
yeah.
disinformation that we
I
see
mean,
now.
it was enough that there was newspapers that you know could put the boot in,
Yeah,
you know, and
Jonathan.
they
Yeah,
did.
sure.
And so
Sorry, go on,
yeah.
go on. Sorry,
No.
please
I
carry on.
mean,
Now, I just want to say,
yeah,
how old are you now? I just want to understand, like, how
I'm
many.
I'm 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 76.
See, look at this.
I
So you're
didn't
three
even think
months.
that I never thought that I was going to hit 40, you know.
Oh,
And when I hit 40, and by this time I'd met Nigel, and we were living in this housing co-op, and the housing co-op that I lived in has this big communal garden. So there are 5 houses on Railton Road, and there were then 4 houses on Mail Road, because within the houses on the Mail Road side, there was 146 and 148, and then 152 Mail Road. But there was this kind of derelict house full of dry rot in the middle of it. And there was already a scheme that had been created for the refurbishment of what was called the gay and lesbian community of Brixton Housing Co-op. But there was this one house in the middle that was full of dry rot. And when I joined the co-op and joined the development subcommittee, who were looked after the kind of the buildings that the co-op owned. We had a discussion and decided that we would go to the housing corporation, this place that looked after housing co-ops and housing associations, and ask whether or not they would actually allow Brixton Housing Co-op to find who owned 150 and see if we could bring it into the scheme. And amazingly, they said yes. So there was a architect's practice called Solon, which was also a housing association. And they found out that this house, who owned this house, and the co-op was able to buy it. But this house cost £12,000 as opposed to the £3,000 of the others. So we were told that there had to be £9,000 of savings. And as luck would have it, the next two people on the housing list to be housed happened to be Nigel and myself. So I said to Nigel, do you want upstairs or do you want downstairs? And Nigel instantly said he wanted upstairs. And I said, that's great, because I go downstairs and I got access to the garden. And, you know, the garden was like my saving grace, because suddenly, you know, I'd got a roof over my head, but I got a garden, and you can grow things, and you plant stuff and see how it grows or it doesn't or what have you. And, you know, it was just, yeah, I mean, that was amazing. But anyway, you know, we've kind of veered off because of Nigel and because of his politics. When the miners' strike started in 1984.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here. I'm going to stop at that because I want to show what you sent me, the sapling that you planted and how it's grown. Can I quickly show the video?
Yeah.
So, you've got
That's
that
April
photo.
1989.
Brilliant.
That's
And
Nigel and I planting that twisted hazel. Reason, all right, and that's it. And the reason that I love the twisted hazel is because I had been told that somebody had injected a hazelnut with a virus, and that is why it became contorted.
I see.
And I just thought, you're the tree for me.
That's your personal story tree, isn't it?
That is my personal story tree. And what is fabulous is that the squirrels would come along and they would bury the hazelnuts, and then up would come these saplings. And, you know, we didn't want a garden. We didn't want a wood. You know, we wanted a garden. So I would dig them up and put them into pots and kind of grow them on. And relatively recently, I had planted like what was potentially a hedge, but there were all these straight up hazels. And I eventually, about a couple of years ago, got up the nerve to actually layer the hedge, which means you have to cut into it and bend it over. So as you bend them over, then they start coming up all the way along. And I created a hedge with a friend of mine, Stephen Dryden, and created a hedge out of all these hazels.
Wow, wonderful. Before we go on to the minors, because I do want to talk to you on that topic as well.
Yeah.
I just want to understand, we'll close the chapter on the HIV and the AIDS crisis, but I want to understand grief. You must have, because I was very, very little when I was in India at that time, and we were, I was young and I was reading these stories. There was a lot of fear everywhere that you can't
Yeah,
touch
yeah,
people,
yeah,
it's infectious, it's contagious, all that
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
was. And
yeah,
we were very young, it's a
yeah.
gay disease, people saying. But people, we were also getting numbers, statistics like we got during COVID times.
Oh
So many people
God,
are
yeah,
dying. So how
yeah,
did you
yeah.
manage the grief when you yourself knew that you were given the death sentence?
I, I, I don't know. You just do deal. I mean, I honestly can't answer that question. It just, it became like it was just a fact of life, you know? And I don't know whether kind of because of being born Jewish, you know, life is really important, l'chaim, you know, to life. And maybe that just, you know, you just have to deal with it. And it's a natural fact, you know, we are born and we die. And basically, you know, those are the only certainties. What you make of it in the middle is what you make of it. And I think that's really important to understand. And I think that when you're given a terminal diagnosis, you either collapse or you somehow find the strength to do things. And I think that I have been incredibly fortunate in terms that at the point that I had kind of made a decision that I was going to rejoin society, that I happened to meet this extraordinary man.
Sure.
And that extraordinary man kind of gave me a life. But it wasn't just giving me a life, it was, you know, creating a life with him and then getting so involved with things. And for me, my way of them dealing with it was what I call displacement activity. So anything that I could do that would keep my mind off thinking about that your time is up, you know, that was great. So, you know,
Yeah, and you didn't live in fear as such. You didn't go to sleep at night and think, "Oh, am I going to see tomorrow?" That didn't happen because
that,
you
no,
kept
that,
yourself busy.
well, I kept myself busy so that, you know, either one was just so exhausted because of what you were doing, or that there was so much to do and one would go to bed looking forward to what tomorrow was going to bring because there were all these things to do. Yeah.
Wow, wow. Okay, now we'll go on to the minors conversation because that is something
Yeah.
that happened in what 1984, 85, and
1984, 85. Yeah.
yeah, tell us more about it. The hostility, the marginalization. What was
Well,
happening at that time?
basically what was happening was that you know, Margaret Thatcher had decided that she was going to destroy the strongest union that there was, and the strongest union happened to be the miners' union. And what was also interesting for me was that when I was an actor in 1972-73, I was contracted to play the genie of the lamp in Aladdin at the Grand Theatre in Swansea. Now, my mother was born in Swansea. Her father was an Orthodox rabbi. She was born in Swansea in January 1914, but in March 1914, they emigrated as a family. So there was my maternal grandfather, whose name at that point was Herbert J. Sandheim, and his wife Ida, and the elder daughter Anne, and then my mother. And Anne was about 12 years older than my mother. And my mother was born in January, but they emigrated to Winnipeg. in Canada. But I had a connection with Swansea, South Wales. So I knew that. And then as an actor, there I was playing the Slave of the Lamp in Aladdin. And the first miners' strike happened under Ted Heath. And because Ted Heath realised that there was only 9 months of coal left in the stockpiles, they then decided that they would ration electricity. So there became what was called the 3-day week. So you would have electricity for 3 days, but for 4 days you would be without it. And I was working, as I say, at the Grand Theatre Swansea. So they decided to hire a generator and they bought a ship's fog light so that the fog light would illuminate the auditorium and the stage and the show could go on. And there was this amazing act, Anna Lou and Maria, who had performing dogs and doves. And the doves were multicolored. They were all dyed different colors of the rainbow. And when the dogs had done their work, Maria would stand like a Balinese dancer with her arms outstretched, wearing a kind of pagoda hat, and the spotlight was on her, and they would release the doves who would fly around the auditorium and then flutter and sort of arrive on her. Huge applause. So the first time that there is no electricity, so there is the ship's fog light, they release the birds. Well, they haven't a clue what to do, so they're just flying around the auditorium doing their droppings, that's it. But they just don't know where to go. I mean, it's total chaos. So on the nights that there were no electricity, the bird act was cut. It was fabulous. Anyway, so I remembered that. So of course, when Gay Men and Lesbians, we joined it, there happened to be this amazing connection with South Wales because of the communists. The young communists had already made connections with this community in South Wales. Mark Ashton, who had created Lesbian and Gay Sport Miners with Mike Jackson, was a young communist. Now, of course, when the film Pride came out, they never mentioned him being a communist and a member of the Communist Party. But the actual fact of it was that because he was, the chair of the Young Communists, and there was already this connection, that was why we joined with the community in South Wales. And what is amazing is that it was the women who kind of took the men in hand. And it was the women who said, we should take these people's money that they're offering. What is wrong with it? What's the problem? And it was agreed that anybody who did feel that it was a problem for them, that they couldn't deal with our sexuality or what's name, they would know when we were coming down and they would make themselves scarce. So when we have finally arrived, because there were 2 Hackney community transport things and a clapped out old Volkswagen, and there were about 30 of us who all went down to Delise for the first time. And we got incredibly lost. And so for the first night, when eventually we found Di Donovan's house, there were 30 of us that slept on his living room floor. And then the next day, we went into the welfare. And we were actually incredibly nervous. And as we walked in, the room went deathly silent. And internally, one just thought, oh my God. And then one person started applauding, and the whole room applauded. And we just thought, it's all right, we're home. And
Brilliant.
it was absolutely extraordinary. And like kind of, you know, there were lots of people, lots of working class kids who absolutely kind of, they knew, you know, these places. It was all part and parcel of their background. I, in a way, didn't. I came from a middle class, so it was very different. But there was such warmth and such generosity. I mean, when you think that there are these communities that are being decimated by a government and have virtually nothing to offer, but they did. They kind of welcomed us. And they were seriously more worried about the idea that there might be vegetarians amongst us than anything else. I mean, you know, because what were they going to give us? I mean, it could just be like egg and chips. I mean, and it was that extraordinary, but they were amazing. And what is incredible is that, you know, our friendships have lasted. You know, we still see one another. I still go and see Sean. You know, one is still in contact with these people. You know, and it is just it's mind blowing.
It's
And it's
amazing.
also that there are so many things that you know. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of gabbing on, but what is really important is that the South Wales miners put pressure on the National Union of Miners, even though the strike was lost. They put pressure on the National Union of Miners to give, to put their block vote to get lesbian and gay rights into the Labour Party manifesto. People had been trying this for years, but it was always told, no, this is not the time. And the National Union of Miners also asked other unions to use their block vote. So it is because of the trades union movement that we have our civil partnerships. You know, when and people don't talk about this, they don't think about this. And it is so important because, you know, trades unions are often vilified, but they are basically communities of workers who are looking after one another. And that's what is important. It's about communities coming together. So the very fact that we as a small group of lesbian and gay people, and then there were Lesbians Against Pit Closures who also sort of joined, you know, when communities come together, they can do extraordinary things. But
I so
people
agree.
need to know about it.
I agree. And I think that also speaks for itself in the present right now, when
Absolutely.
we are seeing pushback, and this is what we need. We need communities to come back together. You know, and what you're sharing is an example of how things can dramatically change when we collaborate and our struggles are together. Basically, we fight it together.
No. And you see, what was extraordinary about those years, because Ken Livingstone, who was the leader of the GLC, and Thatcher loathed the GLC because for the most part, you know, they were Labour supporters, of course. But what was amazing about that man was that he had, or they had, the Inner London Education Authority. And in 1985, Ken Livingstone came up with this idea that if you were out of work and unemployed, you could pay £1 and you could do any number of courses at City Lit, Morley College, any of the adult education places. And one day, Nigel and his friend Barry Prothero were going off to do a trouser making class. And I said, oh, that sounds fun. Can I come along? And he said, of course, all the merrier. And we went off to this place called the Strand Institute, which was off Tulse Hill. And we were up on the 5th floor, which were the old chemistry laboratories. And there was this lovely elderly Jewish tailor called Harry. And the first thing that Harry said is, I want you to sit cross-legged on the tables, because tailors used to buy table space. And that's how they would make their clothes. They would have a board across their knee and they would sew. And they would use the table, you know, at some point to cut out their patterns. So Harry says, I want you to sit cross-legged on the table. My father used to sell furniture. That was his business. He was a house furniture. If you ever sat on a table, you were screamed at, get off the table, chairs you're sitting on, not table. So Harry, in one phrase, had given me permission. I could transgress. So I'm sitting on this table thinking, well, how many pairs of trousers do I need? Really, what I need to learn is how to make a pattern. And someone pipes up, oh, they do that at the London College of Fashion in Shoreditch. So the next day, I go to the London College of Fashion in Shoreditch and I register for a pattern making class. And it's fabulous. I love it. It's very geometric, but there's something very satisfying about being able to make a pattern and then turn that into something. And I'm doing it and loving it. And my tutor says, oh, by the way, don't know if you'd be interested, but we do a 3-year City and Guild in tailoring. Would you be interested? And internally, I just laughed. I thought 3 years, I'll be dead before I finish that. But I spoke with Nigel, and, you know, the miners' strike by this time is over. So why not? Because that will be something that'll keep me busy, keep me occupied. And I went to Lambeth and I asked them if they could give me a grant, and it was still grants, not loans. And they said yes. And I'd had a grant when I went to drama school, so I thought that I wouldn't be allowed another one. But I was. And so I decided that I would do that. And so I went, and I remember going for my interview. And I'm told to go and, oh, well, no, I go and I've missed out a whole period. I go and I do this tailoring course, and it's fabulous. Love it. And at the end of it, 3 years, so 1988, I come out, and what am I going to do? And one of my tutors there says, I can't get you a job, but I could get you an introduction to the wardrobe at English National Opera. And I just thought, theatre holds no mystique for me, but I absolutely love opera. It's so overblown. So I go along with my portfolio, and I'm asked to go and wait in the men's workroom. And there are all these people at their sewing machines, and I really don't want to engage, and I'm feeling really nervous. So I'm looking at the notice board, and suddenly this letter just leapt out at me. It was pinned on the notice board, thanking everybody in the workroom for all the support they'd given to a guy called Peter Barr, who was one of the men's cutters who had just died from HIV/AIDS. And I thought, I want to work here because when I get ill, they'll understand. Sorry.
You okay?
Yeah, it kind of gets
I'm sure.
it gets to me because, you know, the very fact that there seems to be this safe space, that there are people who understand about the virus HIV that have been supportive of someone at a time, when we've just had the Don't Die of Ignorance campaign. There is still all this hate that is being sort of, perpetrated against, gay people. It's been weaponized. So to find a safe space is just extraordinary.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Thank you.
extraordinary.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm like just feeling very touched. And I just want to say to the listeners at this point, Jonathan, we are running out of time, but I still
Oh
have
God, I'm so
questions for you if you
sorry.
don't mind.
Yeah.
We are already over time, but that's okay. We can speak for another 10 minutes at least.
All
And
right.
whatever, I just want to give a trigger warning to the listeners who are watching, because there have been several moments during our conversation where I have myself felt a bit triggered, and thank you for sharing. So I will make sure that we will give a trigger warning repeatedly
Yeah,
through this.
do
Yeah, yeah,
because but I think it's important that one talks about these things. I mean, as difficult as it is for people, and you can see how emotional I got, just sharing that fact. But I think that I've been incredibly fortunate. And what has been amazing, kind of sort of through all this time, because of, I suppose, that meeting Nigel, but also kind of being part of LGSM, Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors. So whenever there are sort of issues, we kind of, we'll go on demonstrations as a body.
yeah.
And then, that at our 30th anniversary, the 30th anniversary of the miners' strike, suddenly there is this film that appears, Pride, and I mean, what was fascinating about that was that Stephen Beresford, who wrote this, during the kind of, it was 1993, and John Major was closing the remainder of the mines that Thatcher hadn't closed, and he had a relationship with someone, and this person was saying, why aren't people out on the street? They should be out on the street. And Stephen said, but why are you thinking now? Why should people be out on the street? And he told him about Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors. And Stephen thought he was being patronized. And it was too far-fetched. And the idea that a group of people would go down and support miners in South Wales is ridiculous. And he really wasn't having it. And he kind of stormed off, and he felt he was being patronized, and that was that. But when computers became more accessible, so we're talking about like the 2000s, so this was 1993. One day he thought, I wonder if this could be true. So he tapped in Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors, and people can still do this. And up came this 27-minute documentary called All Out Dancing in Dulais.
Mm.
And there was the whole story. But there were lots of talking heads, but no names. So he had to wait until the credits went up. And as the credits went up, he realized that if he tapped in Mike Jackson, he'd just get billions of hits. But up came this name, Reggie Blennerhassett. And he thought, there can't be that many Reggie Blennerhassetts in the world. And he went to Facebook and he found a Reggie Blennerhassett. So he sent him a message. asking him if he'd been a part of Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Miners. And Reggie responded and said he had, and they met. And Reggie vetted him to make sure that he understood the politics. And he felt that he did. So he then passed him to Mike Jackson. And Mike did exactly the same. And then gave Stephen all the names of the existing members of LGSM, those that hadn't died from HIV/AIDS or what have you, and people in South Wales. And I remember Stephen coming round and interviewing myself and Nigel. And he was with us for about 4 hours. And then, you know, that was enough. He left, and Nigel and I just looked at one another and we thought, oh, yeah, nothing's going to happen here. And then about 15 months later, I get a phone call. Oh, my name's Stephen Beresford. I don't know if you remember me. I came and interviewed you. Well, I need to come and see you again. So I said, of course. And we made an appointment. And I remember going to the front door, the doorbell rang, and there is this tall gentleman standing there. And I said, oh, can I help you? And he said, you see, you don't remember me. Oh, I said, well, come in, come in. Anyway, he came in. He said, something in your story just inspired me, and I have written a character, and he's based on you, and I've called him Jonathan. You can't read the script, you have no say in the matter, and the company will pay you £1 for using your name. And I just thought, oh, all right, that's fine, and off he went. And then I remember Nigel then had a stroke in 2013. So that was really difficult. But he survived, but suddenly I now have become a carer. Thank God we live in the same house. So he's upstairs, I'm downstairs. But, you know, it's easy to be a carer. Exhausting, but it's much easier. And I then get this message, Jonathan, please could you ring me? So I'm sitting out in the garden and I call Steve and I said, you rang me, you said you want me to call me, how can I help? Oh, he said, the director and the actor who's going to play you would like to meet you, is that possible? I said, of course it's possible, when are you thinking? And he said, well, how about tomorrow tea time? And I thought, there is just enough time to make a lemon drizzle cake, because you can't have people to tea without cake. Yeah, that's fine. And the next day arrives, and the doorbell goes, and there is Stephen Beresford, who is holding this extraordinary bouquet. And I said, are you off to a wedding? No, they're for you. Thrusting this bouquet of cabbages and cabbage roses in my hand. And I say, well, where are the others? Oh, they're at a costume fitting. They'll be around soon. So I said, come in, you can have tea, but no cake till they arrive. And we're chatting and shooting the breeze. And the doorbell goes. And I go and open the door. And this man thrusts his hand out and introduces himself as Matthew Warkus, the director. And over his shoulder, I can see McNulty from The Wire. Dominic West. And that was the point that I realized that it was Dominic West who was going to be playing.
Brilliant. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing. We've just really run out of time, Jonathan. Yeah. We may need to bring you back to have a part 2 with Jonathan Blake, because I think, your story is, we've learned about people, about places, about experiences, about grief, about so much today. I was going to ask you about Nigel, but you've already shared about Nigel. Seems like you had a wonderful partnership, and I think we all need to.
He was, we were, I think, a very good team of companions, and he was Jewish. So, the only person in my family who's been in a relationship with another Jew, because neither my elder brother nor my younger brother.
Amazing. Well, you were the one. And Jonathan, thank you so much. Really, thank you so much. Speaking, with you today reminds us that survival is never just personal. It's, woven into community, memory, and action. Your life has been a testament to courage, to refusal, to speaking truth when the world wanted silence. And I'm like, I was just trying to calculate, you were 33 when you got diagnosed, and now you are
Yeah.
76. 43 years of the 3 months has beautifully extended itself. So
Yeah.
from your, yeah, early activism and to all the work you're doing, including, we haven't had time to speak about the UK AIDS Memorial Quilt, but like I said, we'll
Yeah.
definitely love to have you again. And you have shown us that remembrance, grief, and visibility are themselves acts of resistance. So thank you very much for being here with us today. I need to thank our partners. We have outreach partners who support
Mhm.
us to make this, to amplify this, which is Outspoken Speakers, Out and Wild, Proud HR, My G Work, GFW Clothing, and Ageism is Never in Style. We also want to thank, of course, Nicola, the person behind this, all her creativity, all her technology, everything is done at the back end by
Indeed.
Nicola. So thank you, Nicola. And if you want to share feedback, comment, or nominate someone, please write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. See you again soon.